This month's Where Did the Road Go is brought to you by 5 amazing people. Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Bart Ooms, 36 Dingo, and Michael Fritzky. If you want to become a patron, www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I am joined by Super Inframan.
Hello, hello.
Also Saxon.
Also known as Saxon, depending on the day.
And we have with us our guest, Leo, who has had some very strange paranormal experiences in his life.
Hi, everyone.
And you had written me and wrote up a bunch of the stuff that's happened to you, or especially a certain subsect of it. But you said to me that you've had weird experiences your entire life. Also, I like the fact that you're into the Seth material. Oh, yeah, totally. Seth, definitely. And yeah, when I heard you talk about Seth, I'm like, okay, finally someone who gets Seth. yeah. You would think there'd be more people out there talking about it, but most people have never read it. Yeah, it's incredibly good quality. And I guess before I read it, I sort of thought maybe it was just maybe flaky New Age channeling stuff or whatever, right? Yeah, exactly. yeah. And then
I had heard about it.
Yeah.
In passing for a long time, but I didn't read it until I had been on the show a few times listening to Seriah talk about it.
Right.
So I don't know if it's one of those things where how many people are aware of it, but nobody's read it kind of thing or what. But it's definitely worth your time.
Oh, it's amazing. I found it at a garage sale down the street from me. It was like I think it was like an original edition of The Nature of Personal Reality in paperback. And that's so I felt that was kind of cool because I felt it was kind of serendipitous that I ran into it and stuff. But
yeah.
And then I was like, this is just so detailed and like so real, you know?
Yes, that's the thing. It's not like most channeled stuff where it's very vague.
Yeah.
The 10th dimensional, this went against this shape of the, he's like very literal and here's how you change your own reality. And it's like, here's how things work. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and not flaky, no Archangel Michael.
Right, yes, exactly.
I always love that what you point out too, Seriah, is how Seth is fine talking about things he doesn't quite know and saying,
I don't know.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Which goes a long way with me too, because it's, I don't know, some of the other channel materials and things like that.
Yeah.
I start to get skeptical when anybody decides that they have to have all the answers in what they're putting out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. It feels genuine. So, yeah.
All right, so let's get on to you, Leo.
Yeah, well, I'm up in Ontario, Canada. I'm in my early 50s. I'm a dad. I guess in a lot of ways lead a fairly regular life. Have a corporate job and stuff. But yeah, since a kid I've been a very creative type, very musical, played music my whole life, just kind of in a very automatic, natural kind of way. Written songs, played in bands at different times of my life and stuff. And I think that sort of transitioned, like my artistic side kind of grew into more seeing reality in a different way and sort of getting the feeling that this reality wasn't sort of self-contained. And I realized I kind of saw things in a different way. Pretty, around the age 17, 18, I would say.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Kind of getting into high school. I sort of had the opportunity to go into higher education and have a pretty privileged upbringing overall, and decided not to go that way. And I just had a strong feeling that it wasn't the way I was supposed to go, I guess. Whether I made the right move, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder. But I managed to have a decent career nonetheless, I guess, just through luck partly. But from there, once I had sort of decided I'm not following, music was what I thought I was going to pursue, and I did that for a while, but didn't really, the cards didn't really fall into place for that. But I think when I started to get into my late 20s, I started to really experience synchronicities in a way that was making me really stop and take notice, and because they were so complex and specific. And I'm sure you guys have had those types of experiences too.
Yeah.
And so that was where I just started to say, okay, something's happening. It's like it felt like communication. And I think, having a musical brain is part of it. I think it's because you see these things click into place like musical harmony in a way.
It's an interesting way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. And that's, because I'm musical, maybe that's just how I interpret it, but I think there's some parallel there. Yeah. And it's like you're getting a higher dimensional form, sort of overlapping temporarily into your life, into your reality in a sense, because it's this thing that connects your inner thoughts and then these outer events, in this close proximity in time. And then you're just left going, how does that happen?
Yeah.
And I guess I started to see that as a very subversive kind of thing. Like, I've always been interested in things that are subversive, right? Even though I live a fairly, I need to live a fairly normal life to support my family and so on. But to me, a synchronicity is a really subversive thing, because it overturns, it's like we're told all these things by the materialists and so on, but then we experience something like that, and it throws it all out the window in a way. And it's a direct experience. That's what I like about it. I like, it's not academic. It's not a theoretical thing.
Right.
It
has meaning.
It has meaning. Yeah. It's pointing you in some direction. Like, it might not be the content of the synchronicity. I don't think necessarily has to be the thing. It's just sometimes just the fact that it's happening.
Yes.
It might be about nothing. I had one about baklava, like the Middle Eastern dessert,
Yeah.
Yeah. So Chris talks about this some, but, he always talks about, like, he thinks all musicians are shamans, essentially.
Oh, okay.
Or all musicians are magicians, depending on which terminology you want to use. But
right.
He's really getting me into thinking about, like, anybody that's creative. I think music's a little bit more of a main line than some of the other art pursuits and things like that. But, if creation's a fundamental part of everything, you're tapping into that in a way. And I think that's to your point about the harmonies and things. Yeah. I don't know. I think you're starting to mainline that in a certain way and being more open to creation to talk to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And music, I guess, has a sort of a special place in the arts, I guess. Just maybe the way it hits you, just vibrations and,
Well, it's also hardwired into our brains.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even people say, well, I'm not musical, except everybody knows how to sing along with the song, and a catchy tune can affect anybody, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Get it stuck in your head, whether you know how to play an instrument or not,
Right. And you perform music, and obviously there's performance art, but, if I'm going to create a piece of art, it might be over a certain period of days, but there may not be anybody there to witness me doing this. And once I'm done with it, I'm probably not going to create it again. I'm going to try to do something else. But when you get to live those harmonies over and over in front of a crowd and have that active participation being a constant, and that's no slight to people that create graphic art, because that was always my thing, and it still is.
Right.
Yeah, well, visual art is amazing too. I mean, I have dabbled in it, but they each have their own special kind of domain, I guess. And I think a synchronicity it's kind of like a form of art. I started to see it that way after a while. Like, it's like somebody on the other side is creating this art form.
Yes.
Yeah,
because it's got to come from a mind. And that gets to the question of what mind is, right? Is mind part of everything? Or is there someone on the other side with a little control panel lining up these synchronicities?
Right. Well, I think it was Paul Kimball who suggested that the paranormal was basically an art project of the other.
Yeah. Interesting. I hadn't heard that. Yeah. And maybe we're an art project too.
Yeah.
Right.
For me, so then I guess, the synchronicity was really the thing I started to really notice. Okay, this is kind of, because I had gone through a few years of kind of not experiencing much like that. And then it's like, okay, it's coming back for me again, and And then from there, I did things like EVP. I met a friend who had done it, and I really liked the idea of it, but I thought I would just be sitting around for days and nothing would happen. But he's like, no, I've done it and it works. You can do it. And I really got into that for a bit.
Well, talk about that a little bit. Now you're talking like ghost hunting?
Well, no, just more like just doing it in your house, like with a recorder in a silent room.
Oh,
yeah, that's I think I think I've heard you guys talk about some of the early EVP folks, like in the 60s and so on, like Jürgensen, I think was his name. He was a filmmaker, and I think he was out recording birds in the woods, and then started to hear voices on his recordings.
No, I'm not aware of that. That's interesting.
Yeah. And you mentioned Raudive, I think.
Possibly.
Raudive, maybe. But so Jürgensen, I think he's the first one who kind of popularized it, and I think he put out an album, like an LP of EVPs and stuff. And
that sounds like something Chris Hertz would have brought up.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. But so he was hearing these voices on his bird recordings, and being a filmmaker, I guess he was pretty technically savvy and stuff. And then so he started to isolate the voices and so on. And so he wasn't, ghost hunting or anything like that. It just started. And I think some of the earliest phonograph recordings, from what I've heard, have had voices on them that weren't there in the room at the time. And so for me, it was just, digital recorder, and kind of a meditative thing. It became a bit of a mediumship thing, meaning it wasn't just the technology doing it, it's doing it through you. It's
right.
It requires a peaceful kind of mindset and a quiet mind sort of thing.
And that's been one of my thoughts about that some EVPs may either be channeled through us, or we're just flat out creating them without realizing it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's definitely one of the theories behind it is that it is literally thoughts in your mind going on to the recording. I would often get a woman's voice showing up.
Interesting.
Yeah. The first one I ever got said, "Let's talk, Leo."
Oh,
like the first noticeable one. I had sort of very vague ones before that. Yeah. And so that to me was like, okay, that's something. And there's no one in the room. It wasn't the neighbors or anything, so, and so did that for a while. I'd say over a couple of years, and then I moved on from it. I find that's what I do. Sometimes I'll go heavy on something for a while, and then, okay, well, I'm not just going to keep doing this forever. And you also want, like, because I was interested in things like channeling and stuff, I wanted something that was more of a sustained communication, right? I mean, these are very short bursts of voice, and you're not getting a lot of, paragraphs and long, bits of information and stuff.
Did
you get anything useful from the EVPs?
That's a good question. I think it was an incredible experience. The experience was amazing. And there were times when I actually got into, I guess, what you'd call instrumental transcommunication. So that's actually using radios.
Right.
And then I could actually hear things coming through the radio that I was quite sure were not normal. This, like, you have a radio station on, you have it on static, and then suddenly after half an hour or 45 minutes, a burst of voice comes through. And then goes back to static.
Oh, wow.
Right. So if you're ever you can check out our website, worlditc.org. I think it's still live. It's from like late 90s. It's that kind of, it's got that kind of look to it. And, but it's a huge archive of instrumental, what they call instrumental transcommunication, which is kind of EVP sort of being a subset of that. And ITC being more the use of radios, televisions. There's stuff on there that's just like, there's people coming through on TVs, like speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, you have to evaluate whether you think it's real or not, but it's kind of so bizarre that it's like no one made any money off it. It's not, it's something that got in the media at the time. It's, I think, 70s, 80s into the 90s a bit, when a lot of this wild stuff was happening. Telephone calls from, that's probably something you guys have heard of, like just phone calls from the dead.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So that was definitely part of it, but long kind of, and one particular guy on the other side, this was Constantine Raudive, I think was his name, would call the team. There's a team doing this in America and in Europe, and they're all connected together as a team, and he's calling them on different phones at different times, and And he was part of the team, and then he died, and then he.
I see. He kept calling them after he had passed on.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
Yep. So it's like that whole, you hear people saying, well, when you're dead, you got to send me a sign or something, like phone calls a pretty good way to do it.
Yeah.
Hey, Leo, when you were getting some of these different communications, did you ever feel confident in identifying like a relationship to whatever was giving you or communicating back to you?
That's
Go ahead.
It's a really good question, and I did, yes, and I had a friend. So the friend who introduced me to it, he was actually a professional psychic. So he still has a career. It's the only career he's ever had. He makes a living as a psychic, and I believe is very talented and genuine. As his abilities are genuine, and he would sort of give me some information about who he thought was coming through, and there was a female voice that was in many, many different clips that seemed to be the same person, and the one who said, "Let's talk, Leo," and he would tell me that's your spirit guide, using that sort of new agey kind of term, but which I felt that makes sense to me, that it's that this person is coming through,
Yeah.
And I think she would turn up in dreams too,
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, like I had a dream she was talking to me through a microphone, like it was very real, like she was doing an EVP but into my dream.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So yeah, it was pretty neat. It all kind of came to close at one point. Like I had an antenna connected to this radio that I was using, and then suddenly it stopped working properly. And then I went up on the roof, and the antenna, the cable that was going up to the roof had been chewed through by something. Like I don't know if it was a raccoon or what, but it was just a strange little coda to the whole thing. Like this cable had been chewed right through, because I hooked it up to the old 70s TV antenna on the roof. It sort of seemed to make everything happen. And then after that happened, this whole thing just kind of stopped. And then I get little bits here and there over the years after that. But, and like I said, I sort of moved on from it. And, but it was kind of my first real direct experience of doing something paranormal, and really great. I'm glad I did it. And I can always play you guys some of the recordings. If you'd like, not right now, but maybe another time. But
yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So then, really from there, I did some stuff with channeling with my friend who I mentioned, and we put out a book about that. Well, you probably haven't heard of it, and it's that was a really good experience to do that. He would basically say that he had this voice that he would hear sometimes in the morning, and of course, that sounds scary, like what's it telling you to do when someone says they're hearing voices and stuff. But I'd say, well, what is it saying? It said, well, it's kind of talk of like universal sort of wisdom stuff. And I had already been reading Seth for years at that point, and I was really interested in this idea. And then he's like, it tells me also to drink less and eat more broccoli. So it's like, okay. So, because people often will say, well, it's bad, don't do it. You have to protect yourself. You have to do all kinds of, what's the word when you do protection spells or whatever. And, smudge or whatever. Yeah. Maybe sometimes you do need to do that. But I felt like with what we were doing, that, telling me to eat broccoli, it seemed like a pretty good sign.
Right.
So,
doesn't sound too malign.
Yeah. Unless he's, just putting on a mask and then he's going to show his real self later.
Right.
So, so that was another really great thing. But we did that for a while, and it's hard to sustain something like that, I think, for a long time. I think Jane Roberts was pretty remarkable to do that for like 20 years and put out like 10 books or whatever,
and right to her deathbed.
Yeah. And died, I think she got quite ill and it wasn't all that healthy. Yeah.
Yeah. She had, rheumatoid arthritis.
Right. Yeah. And, so I guess from there, so all along while my life was going on with all this stuff, there was this other thing. So, and that's the thing that involves this property, which I'll tell you about. And and sort of kicked off very dramatically in 2001. And that, when I was around 20 and I had started to get into, reading about ancient history, like Graham Hancock type stuff. And I think the Daily Grail was a website at that time, and I was getting everything through the Daily Grail. And I just would look at that site every day and just link me off to so many books and things like that. So I was starting to, in addition to experiencing synchronicities and so on, I was really starting to research different ideas and things like that, and start to over time develop my own ideas. And I was very particularly interested in Indigenous American history and sort of getting a real timeline of how long Indigenous people have been on this continent, and how that keeps getting older and older. And I was just very interested in that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And things like, underwater stuff like Graham Hancock was researching in Bahamas and stuff, or Bermuda, I guess. And so this property was it's a place I've been going every summer for my whole life. So it's an island. It's not particularly remote. You can drive there. I'm in one of the big cities here in Ontario, and you can drive there for the weekend and come back on Sunday night. And it's not. There's a lot of cottages on. I guess you guys would call them cabins in the U.S., but yeah.
Okay.
Up here it's yeah, and so very few of them are really cabins anyway. They're all homes. Our place is more like an actual cabin, but. So this place is my family's been there for generations. I'm actually like the 5th generation up there, because they came on my dad's side. They came directly from England in the 1860s and settled there. And so you have kind of the newer folks with newer properties up there, but then you've got this kind of you got us and a lot of our extended family with places around there that are quite old. And so my grandfather bought this island probably in the 40s or 50s for $300.
Damn.
Yeah. So pretty good deal. And
yeah, right.
Yeah. And so interesting, there was no paranormal stories of any kind that I ever heard. A couple of minor exceptions. I heard of at the place that was my grandparents over on the mainland near where we are. There was some ball lightning that sort of, dug a trench through the lawn and sort of went into the house or something, like these ball lightning type things is the story I remember hearing. There was another time I was out in the lake with my cousins. We're all sort of in different boats, like canoes and boats. And I look up and there was kind of a column of light it was at night, and there was a column of light kind of just stationary in the sky above us, like not far above us. And, just in the air, and it was kind of transparent, a bit hazy, but it was like a column, a rectangular column, and I'm looking at it, going, "Does anybody else?" No one's reacting. No one cares. This is I find how it goes a lot of the time. I'm like, does no one see this? And
right. Yeah.
But I mean, I do have some friends that appreciate this kind of stuff, but sometimes it's and this is kind of a big part of this story is just the idea that how different people can experience the same thing in different ways, and then how they react to it afterwards, right? Can be very different. And so this island, it's a moderate size. You can walk around it in under 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes. And we're the only people on it. There was no electricity up till the 80s or plumbing, so it was living that kind of, we had propane lamps and stuff. Yeah. And then, so it was kind of cool to be able to experience that way of living up until, the mid 80s or something. And then, so out of the blue, kind of, I guess, 2001, I'm watching a movie with my dad. We're watching Dr. Strangelove, the famous movie by Stanley Kubrick with mm-hmm. Peter Sellers. And there's a few other family, maybe my fiance at the time, maybe my brother or something were there. And so the movie wraps up around midnight. We start to shut down, turn the lights out. My dad, everyone goes to bed. My dad and I are just there turning out the lights and everything. And then he goes outside to close the barbecue or do something. And and he's like, what's that? I hear something down at the lake. And so we're up the hill, you have the dock where you dock the boats and you go up the hill, and then we're up at the top. And so he's looking down at the water and saying, something's going on down there. It's a disturbance in the water. And he says, is it birds? Is it birds flying over the surface? You get loons sometimes traversing over the surface of the water. And so I come out and what it seems to be is sort of something moving through the water, making a bit of a racket and going kind of clockwise around the island. So it comes from one side and then keeps going and goes past our dock and then keeps going past. And we're just standing there going, what the hell was that? Because we couldn't see any object. We could just see a disturbance in the water and hear the swishing and water sounds,
Yeah.
and swishing. And then and so as we're standing there, the next thing that happens is we start to hear it come around again in the same clockwise direction. It's coming around, so it's done a lap of the island in a fairly short time, much shorter than if you were swimming around, and more like boat speed, like a small medium motorboat. And so it's coming through, and we're like, okay, and then it goes past the dock again, and we look at each other and go, we got to go down to the dock. This thing might come around again. And we weren't freaked out. We want to see what, we've been up there our whole lives. We're not really freaked out by anything up there. We've never encountered anything that's been dangerous or anything. Right. So, we went down. I remember there was a spotlight in the glove compartment of the boat. So I jump into the boat and plug the spotlight into the lighter outlet thing there. And my dad kind of walks out a bit onto the dock that extends out into the water a bit, and we start to hear it come around. And it approaches from our left, and I'm shining the spotlight on it, and it's the wake. It's a wake with no boat. Essentially, is what it kind of looks like. But I had the feeling that it was being created by something underneath the water.
Right.
But it looked sort of like if you took a boat, like I said, a small, medium-sized kind of motorboat that was going, I would estimate 20 kilometers, which I looked up earlier as 12 miles an hour. It looked like a boat cruising through, but the boat was invisible, But then I thought, well, something's underneath there. There's got to be something underneath that's sort of just under the surface and creating this wake. But I'm shining the light right on it and don't see any object at all. My dad doesn't see anything. So it goes past us. Then it stops. A little ways past us, it stops, and then a head sticks up, and it's stationary, and it's looking at us, and it's a shape of sort of an animal, like a dog or a seal, or not a human shape.
Okay.
Yeah. It pointed, like a snout.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah, like that, like pointed, but staring at us, but no, I wouldn't say staring. It was looking at us, but because it was nighttime, I couldn't make out facial features. I couldn't see eyes or anything, but I could see that it was pointed its head towards us and was just that feeling it's looking at us,
Uh-huh.
And no ears that I could make out, sort of a smoother kind of head. Uh-huh. And it's just there. And we're standing there, and I'm shining the light out, but it's too far for the spotlight to really make any difference. So I couldn't make out any features or anything. And so it's there, I don't know, 4-5 seconds. And then what it does, it swims in a circle. The head goes whoop in a circle, like it's like a kid swimming under the water, and he just kind of goes in a little loop. And then he takes off with his head. I'm going to say he, but whatever, it.
Yeah.
Takes off, head above the water, off into the distance, gone, straight line, quite fast. And then that was that particular event. And so then my dad and I are not scared. We weren't scared. I wasn't. Neither of us were scared. In fact,
you don't think it was a seal or anything like that?
Well, there's no animal like that up there.
Okay.
Let's say for some reason a seal came from further up north or something. It was swimming around the island at the speed of a motorboat. Like it was faster than any animal could swim.
Okay.
By a large margin. And it I actually want to go out in the boat and just sort of give a rough timing of it and figure out the exact speed it was going. But it's swimming in like I know bears probably can swim a bit. but you picture how fast a bear is going to swim. Picture, or even a seal. Like, it's.
Go ahead, Leo. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No problem. So it was really the speed and the mass that it was creating, this wake.
Yeah.
It made no sense.
That's what I was going to ask you about, too, because I was like, I don't think seals displace, not that I'm a seal expert by any means, displace a lot of water when they're swimming like that. Especially enough to like draw your attention and be something where you're like, we got to go look at that.
Yeah. That's right. And this is not very far north. This is actually south of a lot of the U.S. border.
Okay.
It's like when you look at Ontario on the map, most of the population in Ontario is south of the U.S. border.
Right.
Like of all that is. And so it's there's definitely seals are not something that come down there or even close. But I mean, it's always possible one could do that. But it's my dad was just as mystified as I was. So it's really the mass of it creating this huge wake, and then there was another detail I left out. There was a sound when it was moving. There was the sound of kicking, like when you swim the crawl and you're kicking your feet.
Okay.
Yeah, like cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-cha.
Oh, interesting.
It was the sound of 2 feet kicking, but it was going at you couldn't see any feet kicking. That was the strange thing.
Right.
It's very, very clearly, there was nothing above the water, but it was literally the sound of 2 feet, and almost mechanical sounding. It was so precise. It was like mechanical. And it just didn't make sense because there was nothing to make that sound. And if it was kicking under the water, it wouldn't have made that sound. You wouldn't hear it.
Right.
So it was this very clear sound. So that was another thing that just didn't make any sense about it. And so, and I guess just coming from the angle that we've been there our whole lives, and it didn't fit into anything.
Yeah.
There was no way to fit this in. So from there we just kind of shrugged and went to bed. And then we talked a bit about it, and he said, it was a creature, it was an animal. My dad saw the same thing. We both experienced the same thing. It wasn't one of those things where you see different things. But the next day, we got up, had breakfast with everybody. We're telling them about it, and people generally saying, a bear is probably a bear, because that's the only large animal around there. I mean, there's deers, but again, if a deer swimming, you're just going to see this little head moving along at a very, very slow pace, not making any racket or anything. So I guess after that, then my dad, not interested in that kind of stuff, and so my way that I saw it afterwards was very different from his, and he ended up over his lifetime forgetting about it. And he actually lost him a year and a half ago. He's well into his 80s, and his memory had kind of been going, and I tried asking him about it towards the end of his life, and he remembered almost nothing about it. And I think the lesson there is, if you experience something with somebody, do a video where you're talking about it, to do an audio recording just to get it down. Because it's better when someone's there, because then, and I know like Tim Renner's noticed stuff like often these things happen with another person there. And then you have, you're not wondering if it was all your imagination, right?
Right.
So, so I wish I had recorded it. This was before iPhones and everything, of course. So of course we didn't have anything to record the whole event. We weren't walking around with phones in our pockets, and I never really thought, if it was nowadays, I would have just done a voice note and asked him to talk about it, and we had talked about it on tape. So that happened, and then I was a little freaked out in the water after that for the rest of that summer. This was in August 2001, just before 9/11, I guess. It was like a few weeks before it, so it was kind of weird being in the water, swimming, because this was very, very much an unknown thing. So I guess the next summer, we finished the rest of that summer. Nothing unusual. I was really hoping something more unusual would happen. I was
Right.
like, let's keep this going. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I wasn't scared. I wanted it to come back. Yeah. I was like, to me, it announced itself, right? Like it announced itself. It could have swam around the island during the movie and we probably wouldn't have heard it. It was right at the end of the movie. So that was another thing. It was just all these things that made it very intentional to me. That it did this right when Dad came outside and kept going around, kind of drawing us down there, and then once we get down there, it popped its head up.
How many times did it go around the island? Do you remember?
I believe it was 3. So my dad heard it going around once, then we heard it come around again, and that's when we realized when you get repetition like that, then you're like, okay, well, this might happen again. So
Right.
yeah. So I believe it was 3 times, unless it was going around before we even came outside, but it's possible, I guess. But I kind of was looking out for it. I was like, I hope this isn't just a one-time thing. And because I didn't feel that it was dangerous, I didn't get that feeling, but it's still freaky to swim, or be out in a canoe by yourself or something, kind of wondering, because I'll just tell you that this thing had physical power. Like the unmistakable result of this, the impression from this was very much something physically powerful. And certainly my dad, who is a conventional, not interested in paranormal, he didn't entertain the idea. My mom suggested it's a bear, it's a whatever. He's like, no. It was no conventional animal that we know of. He was even willing to entertain that it was some kind of weird submarine.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He was willing to go there because he couldn't explain it in any other way. He knew it wasn't any of the wildlife up there.
Yeah.
So that again, like that helped me to feel okay, because otherwise it'd just be me talking about it and everyone would be like, whatever, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, because they already knew I was kind of, interested in stuff, weird stuff or whatever. So that was good. My dad, the businessman, saw it,
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So really, from there, the next summer, again, I'm sort of looking out for it. So, I just felt like this can't be just happening once and that's it. It's got to be going somewhere. It's got to be some reason that this happened. It's too unusual. It's too strange. And what I started to notice was I'd go walk around the island and I started to notice trees that were bent in a way that didn't make sense to me. And again, this is the kind of thing where it's like, well, a bent tree, that's not necessarily, unusual. But I'm looking at these trees, and again, this is a place I've been my whole life, and I'm like, I started to notice young cedar trees that were bent in a way that they were like folded, like they were like, let's say you put you're like a robot and you really strong robot, and you take one hand and you clasp the trunk, the bottom of the base of the tree, and you take the other hand and you grab the upper part of the tree, and then you bend it over, and like with a sharp fold. And these are young, healthy cedar trees, and only cedar trees.
Right.
I started to know,
that's not natural.
Yeah, exactly. And then I'm looking. I see one, and then I, maybe notice another one later in the summer in the same area. I'm starting, and then maybe in a different area, I'll see another one, and I'm like, were these always here? And I never noticed, and I'm just looking for stuff now.
Right.
And certainly, I'm always questioning myself. I don't sort of reach conclusions very lightly. So I guess I would say these kept appearing, and so I would describe the next few years as, nothing major happened, but these trees kept appearing. And the funnier thing then was I started to notice a bunch of them in the same area were bent in the same direction.
Yeah, you sent me a picture of a couple
Right.
of those, and that's like one is odd, but like you have like 4 or 5 of them all bent the same way in the same direction.
Yes, that's right. And only the cedar trees, and there's other trees like hemlocks and pines, and none of them are touched. And also it's over a period of years they're bent in the same direction. So my mom, had an arborist up there. And she asked him his opinion, because I had started to talk to her about this. Was just recently in the last couple of years. I'd started to say, after 20 years, I'm like, I'm going to say something.
Yeah.
So I'm like, yeah. And so she's like, it's just one of those downspouts, these little mini tornadoes. They happen here and there, And she showed it to him, the arborist, and he's like, yeah, it's one of those little mini tornadoes that happens. But it's like, I wasn't there when he said it. Otherwise, I would have said, well, why did they happen over a period of 10 years?
Yeah.
And why are they all in the same direction? And,
Exactly.
And, yeah.
And why are the other trees okay?
And why are the other trees okay? And why is the outhouse, which is right next to it, why are all the shingles still on the outhouse? Yeah. So it's a very selective little tornado that comes down. And
I feel like if he had said, well, occasionally cedar trees get this disease that causes this, then you could say, okay. But, like mini tornado, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That only dislike cedar trees.
Right.
Okay with the other, yeah.
Right. And a tornado that comes down over a period of 5-10 years. Like
very, very slow tornado.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It takes one tree down, then it comes back for the next one. And no, you're right. Like a cedar disease or something, sure. And then I could at least research that, check it out. But a disease that folds a tree like that, and then also I'd say maybe even the oddest thing about it, at least with one of these trees in particular, it's still alive and very green. And this is like 15 years later or so for this tree, I believe. And I think it's actually still growing. And I think that's one of the pictures I sent you, Seriah, this tree that's it's like a sharp crease in it.
Yes.
And so, and it's like, well, how is that done in a way that the tree's still alive, perfectly healthy and alive? And it made me think of crop circles a bit, because I know in crop circles you get these, the wheat is sort of bent over in a way, but the wheat is still growing and it's still alive, and it's
not broken, and
but it's got like a sharp crease again in it or whatever. So so I started to think of parallels with that a little bit. So that happened. So sort of a few years goes by, and I'm noticing these things. The next thing I notice is I check. We have a septic system there, as all the places do up there, and I noticed that the tank was filling up. It wasn't pumping out. And then I realized the outlet, there's a cord that comes out and plugs into an outlet that's on a post there, and it's been smashed. Like the cord's been hacked away at, and the outlet was smashed like something punched it. Yeah, and so okay, so that happened. So we replaced the pump and everything. And there'll be a little bit more about that later, but so I'll just sort of go over some of the things that happened over the next few years. Like things started to pick up in around 2015, and there was more unusual things happening. So in 2015, there's a little cabin at the other end of the island that I will stay in sometimes, and it has no electricity or anything. And one night I just left the audio recorder going like I used to do with EVP and stuff, and then I sort of started falling asleep, and then I suddenly woke up because there was this voice on the recorder. I had the headphones on, so I was listening through at high volume, and this high pitched voice suddenly makes this sound, and I listened back to it to the point where it woke me up. I started up and I was like, "What the hell?" And it sounded. I had the impression it was coming out from the water, but I guess I probably couldn't tell where it was coming from. But with my experience with EVPs and so on, I listened back to it, and I probably maybe did a noise reduction on it or something, and slowed it down a bit or something. And then it sounded like it was saying the word test, so it was saying test. Yeah. So another time I went to the woods. So I started going to the woods by myself sometimes at night, even if it was just me on the island, and that even in a place that well. That can be a scary thing to do.
Yeah, definitely.
When you think that something, especially when you think that something might happen and you want something to happen, but then you're scared crapless if something happens.
Yeah.
So I'd go out and just kind of bring my iPhone or whatever, just like record video, record audio. And then it was one of the first times I did this. And then I heard this rumble, this like a boom, like this was fairly early into the recording, like 10 minutes or something. And it seemed like it was coming from, I was around the middle of the island, and it seemed like it was coming from the cabin end of the island. and I thought it might have even been coming from underground. And so that, I don't know what that was, and it's on the recording that you can hear this. And so I thought it was coming from over at the cottage. So I ran back there, thought something was happening. And anyway, there was nothing. So there was that. 28. Yeah, go ahead.
But before you go too much further, since, this seemed to have a point in time when it started picking up more.
Yes.
Do you feel like there's anything that was a catalyst for that? Or is it just the fact that you were going out with the intention of
my life changed a lot of
communing with us more or what?
Yeah, my life did change a lot at that point. I actually went through a divorce at that time.
Okay.
And yeah. So it's quite, just as a side note, it's quite amicable, and we're still on very good terms, but, and we have kids but like that was the big change in my life. So whether that precipitated the things happening or the things happening precipitated divorce, right?
But you have that liminality regardless.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it was just that period where I find you can't pinpoint one cause for it. It's just a bunch of things happen that make things change,
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And so, it seemed every summer something was happening. Those last couple of things were like 2015. I'm not sure about the next couple of years, but 2018 was like, I got a call or a text. I was down in the city, and they're like, "Oh, there's a fire on the island, and we're calling the volunteer fire department." And there was a huge storm a couple of days before that, and it had struck a bunch of trees. And then, no one noticed anything, and then fire was burning the whole time inside the trees and in the ground.
Ooh.
And yeah, so that was just very unusual. And I was starting to realize things I was noticing happening were all in the same area of the island. So the bent trees, the bent cedars, and then the fire was right next to where those were.
Okay.
And it struck about 5 or 6 trees and killed them. I've never seen this happen on the island. I'm sure it's happened other places, but so yeah, it's and all the bark is, these strips of wood coming off the trees and launching through the woods like spears and sticking into the ground like spears.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, really, like just amazing. Regardless of whether you think it's whatever you think of it, as a natural event, it was really incredible. And then over time, all the bark strips off these trees and falls off, and they just become these like totem pole kind of things,
Huh.
Yeah, these were big, tall hemlock trees. They weren't cedars this time, but
yeah, because even when you get bugs in trees, like it's not going to come off in strips and shoot across or anything like that when the bark comes off,
Yeah, I mean, I just attributed that to the force of the lightning.
No, that is something that could be, I suppose. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm trying to think if I've seen that elsewhere. I'm not sure, but that's a good question. Maybe I should look up what trees look like after they've been struck, because it was just these shards, like an inch thick, long shard of wood. Yeah.
I was about to say you ought to get like some burn with that though too, if it was struck by lightning.
Yeah. Well, the burn was.
Okay, so it was burnt.
Yeah, it was the inside, like a couple of the trees. It was the core of the tree that was burning.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
The physics are behind that, and then the roots are burning, and and the ground is all, there's fire under the ground essentially.
Okay.
Which is a thing that I've seen that happen before.
Yeah.
With lightning. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they get the fire department to come out to the island, and they're pumping.
Gotcha.
They're just taking the hose and lifting up the dirt. Basically, the water, such high water pressure, they're just taking up all the dirt and getting rid of the fire. And so the only, and then another odd thing was just I noticed after that, then the septic system stopped working again, and I'm like, what the hell? And, this is the pump shorted out, and I asked the plumber or the electrician what he said. Oh, it was probably that lightning strike. That it was definitely it was shorted out.
Wow.
So the lightning strike took out the pump. So again, you have to look at, okay, am I looking for patterns? Am I being, do I want to see things?
Mm-hmm.
That it was smashed like that. And then it was taken out by this strange lightning strike a few years later. And then I think there was a third time where we had to replace the pump. And I'm like, okay, I know. So anyway, so my mind's like, I'm thinking of this creature, and at this point, I have a name for him. I'm calling him Strangelove.
Oh, nice.
I thought, well, that works. That's a cool name. And I think that's probably the name he wants. That's the way I saw it. So to me, I was really giving him a personality. Like it was becoming a presence to me, and however much of that was in my head or not, that's how I was feeling, you know. And I thought, well, it doesn't like the septic tank. It doesn't. Why does it want me to use the outhouse and not use the plumbing system? Like, why does it care?
Right.
like, and then I'm like, I suddenly had this idea that it didn't like the noise of it because the pump is always running on and off, right? Like it doesn't because the way that the thing was smashed, it was like something was angry. Like, what would have done that? A bear? Would a bear come along and smash an electrical outlet?
I wouldn't think so.
Cut the cord? You know, like the cord was cut.
Yeah.
Like that requires a sharp object to do that.
Yeah. You know, I have heard sometimes, you know, I'm trying to remember if this was connected to Thalor or something else, but going back to running water, not liking to cross running water, which I think is also a Western corruption of vampire lore, maybe too. But
it could be,
you know,
and so not wanting to cross over running water.
Yeah.
Right. So if you've got something automated that's moving water,
that's a cool parallel. This is why I came to you guys, right? So think of things like that's a really interesting parallel. Yeah. That's
It's creating unpredictable running water.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm completely open to this type of interpretation. It's entirely possible because to me, it's like I can say, okay, someone might think I'm foolish for thinking this, but to me, it's in my mind, I'm like, I saw that thing was smashed, and this doesn't make sense. There's nothing that would, unless a person did it.
Right.
You know, I'm going to go vandalize somebody's septic sump pump, you know, maybe.
Yeah.
But then you had this lightning strike, and then a third thing as well, you know. So there was that little factor in it, and again, things were moving a bit. You know, they've been, I guess, moving gradually up to that point. This is 2018, and this has been going on since 2001. That every summer I'm kind of seeing these little things, right? So 2019 then is where something bigger happened. So I went up there with a friend from the U.S. and she was quite interested in the situation, and so I had a few close friends that I was talking to about it, and people that were, you know, open to it and were curious about it. And I had maybe two or three friends talking to about it. And so she came up and I said, okay, well, let's do a wood, go camp out in the woods, you know, or just hang out in the woods for a bit, get some folding chairs. And there was this area, it's out by where the bent cedars are, right? So I didn't really explain this part. So the cedars are bent and in the same direction, like I said. If you look at them, they actually kind of start to guide you along, like you can follow them like a path.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I left that little tidbit out. But you can walk along, and what they lead you to is this big rock that's kind of dead center of the island, really. This huge, you know, like I guess left by a glacier or whatever in the ice age, this big, huge boulder there just sitting there. And this boulder's surrounded actually by cedars. So it's kind of like, you know, it's leading you to the boulder of cedars or whatever. And there's a huge cedar towering, going over the boulder that actually is bent as well. And I think it's actually naturally bent because it just kind of rotted on the inside and it's just sort of folded over the rock. So it's kind of like the trees were sort of indicating, you know, like signs to go to that in a way. And so I said, well, let's go camp out. Let's go hang out by this rock. And, you know, it wasn't that late. This is September. This is like September 20th or something. And it's getting cool up there and it's dark early. And so it was like 8 p.m., 9 p.m. or something, and it's already dark. And so she was like, okay, we'll do it. You know, and so we go get chairs and we're hanging out by this rock. And I had my iPhone, and maybe an audio recorder, a dedicated audio recorder and stuff. And I'll just tell you right now, I didn't catch anything on the recorder because it wasn't running when something happened. So,
of course.
Yeah, of course. But I'm also conscious of that may be why it happened because I turned it off.
Yes.
Right.
Because you don't, and I'm very conscious of it's not necessarily that you need to leave everything running all the time. If it wants to be caught on sound or on video, it will be, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So we're out there sitting. We maybe had a little lantern and just, you know, blankets or something to keep warm. And so this is kind of around this big boulder, and then kind of ahead of us is an incline going down to the other side of the island. And there's a lot of trees. It's fairly thick with cedars and hemlocks and pines and stuff. A lot of trees there. And so we're sitting there for a while and run the audio recorder. I don't think I was doing any video. And then I started to feel kind of peaceful, I guess, just a sort of a peaceful feeling, like of oneness. And she noticed, or we both noticed things flying around us, like it was like, it's like a moth, but it wasn't. It was like something flew past us that was like a square. You never know if an insect's reflecting in the lantern light. It could be like a moth, right?
Yeah.
But we both noticed that it was just odd. Like when it's a regular bug, it's just a bug, But it was just something. It went by us, and we noticed it. And then right about after that thing went by. Now I wasn't running the recorder, like I said. Because I was careful to kind of turn it on and off in intervals. Turn it on for a few minutes, off for a few minutes. So this thing flies by us, and I have this feeling, this peaceful feeling. And we had been going. We'd only been there for 10. I think I was starting to think, okay, let's. This was fun. Let's back it up. Let's go back to the fireplace, and and then we stayed for maybe a few more minutes. And then so after that thing flew by us, then this sound came from the woods. So it was down the incline, sort of ahead of us. And my friend who was with me, she considered herself sort of a sensitive, a psychic in a way, and a lot of intuitions and things. She had been looking down. She's like, I keep thinking of that area down there, down the hill. There's something there. So she kept being attracted to that area, or conscious of that area. So then the sound happens. So it's pierces through the night air very suddenly, with no sound before it and no sound after it. And there was no movement. There was no physical object. There was nothing to trace it to, but it came out of a particular location down the hill. I perceived it as coming from down around the hill. She perceived it as coming further out from the shoreline, so a little further down. But it was in the same general direction. And so the sound was very loud and kind of enveloped us. It felt like it enveloped us. And that's sort of something I hear, when you hear reports of Bigfoot sounds and things like that. But it was extremely high pitched.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it was, if you picture a cicada or a cicada, because it was a buzzing, but it was no insect. Because again, it's like, it was far too loud. And just appeared out of nothing, and it wasn't cicada season. It was September. It was cold.
Yeah.
Those things are in the heat, and I don't even hear them up there really. And so picture this little, very high pitched, sustained buzzing that sustains a very, very high pitch, like way up there, and goes for a bit, and then goes down, swoops down to a low pitch, and then goes blah, 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 and does all these sounds in a lower pitch, like all modulated. and then swoops back up, goes back up to a high pitch.
Oh, weird.
Yeah. And and like I said, insect-like maybe, like buzzing.
Right.
Almost made me think a little bit of an aquatic creature, like a dolphin. That type of a sound.
Oh, I see what you mean with the high pitch. Yeah.
You get these high-pitched, squeaky kind of things with dolphins. And so those were the types of sounds I was associating it with. But of course, I knew it wasn't any of those things. It wasn't an insect. It probably wasn't a dolphin, since we were on a freshwater lake.
Right.
And
there was literally not a movement in the leaves. Nothing before it. Nothing after it.
So let me ask you this, Leo. You say like the sound enveloped you. Did it envelop you? Did it feel like it was coming from a particular direction? Because I know what you're talking about was kind of down.
Yes, it did.
Did it seem like it passed and went another direction?
I felt like it was coming from down the hill, but it was like projected up at us.
Okay.
Very much projected towards us, and in such a way that it kind of surrounded us.
Yeah.
Surrounding us, but it was also directional.
Wow.
It was like it was projected at you, and then it was like enclosing you in a way.
Okay.
All right, let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Quick mid-show break here to give you info on how to contact the show and a recommendation. So, how to contact the show. Everything should be at wheredidtheroadgo.com. If you have a story or you want to come on and talk about your experiences, stories at wheredidtheroadgo.com. General contact is contact at wheredidtheroadgo.com. And there's links to our Facebook and Discord and all that stuff at the website, as well as a link to become a patron, which is only a $3 a month thing, and you get extra content all month long. And the show's a week early. If you want to physically mail me something, you can do so at P.O. Box 444, Ovid, New York, 14521. Now for this week's recommendation. I'm going back to podcasts. This one has really grown on me. It's a podcast called Malevolent. It's done by Harlan Guthrie, and I think it's supposed to be sort of a real play sort of thing, or at least at first it was, but it's not structured like that. So anyone who hasn't heard these, there are certain podcasts that are basically you listening to people role-playing. And I could never get into that. I mean, because I used to role play, but I don't anymore, and listening to it doesn't do anything for me. So occasionally I'll pop one on, not realizing that's what it is, and be like, I'm not interested. Because they'll add sound effects and things like that to kind of add to the mood. And there's plenty of people who like that stuff, but usually I steer away from it. In fact, one of our regular co-hosts, Taylor, has started one recently as well. But Malevolent, as I went to start it, looked like it was going to be the same sort of thing, but it's not. And at first it's a little weird because there'll be bits where you're getting the narration and, the character will say, is there anything else here? And you'll hear dice roll. And they get rid of that pretty quickly. It only happens here and there. But to me, it always kind of took me out of the story. But it took a little while for this to grow on me. It's very dry in its delivery. It's clever in the fact that the story revolves around a character, Arthur, who has opened this book and has become possessed by this being. But whatever happened, the possession didn't quite take. So this being only has Arthur's eyes, and the being doesn't know who he is or why he's possessing Arthur. So between the two of them, they don't really know what's going on, but as a story device, Arthur has to rely on this being, later called John, to describe to him what's going on. So you get descriptions, and the descriptions do play out like you would hear in a role-playing game. So I think I listened to a few episodes, wasn't sure, came back to it, and it gets significantly better after the first few episodes. It's definitely an interesting podcast. It's a horror podcast, and it delves deep into sort of the Lovecraftian King in Yellow type of themes and does so very well. I really, really liked it by the time I caught up, and then was disappointed that now I have to wait for episodes. But there's quite a few episodes to go through if this sounds like your type of thing. Malevolent, and that would be my recommendation for this week. All right, back to the show. You're listening to Where Did the Road Go? I have Super Inframan with me, as well as Leo, who's been telling us some very interesting stuff that's happened to him throughout his life. I don't even know what to make of your experiences. That's what I find so interesting about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You were telling us about the noise kind of passing over you, and where I was going to go before the break, and I was waiting to see what you would say, is if the direction seemed anywhere in a line with the way the trees were bent.
Ooh, that's a nice one. Well, when you actually, let's say, I could say that roughly the trees were bent pointing in the general direction of where the sound came from, I would say. Yes, actually, now that you mention it.
Okay. Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, like they were pointing over to that rock, and then we were at the rock, and then the sound was beyond the rock down the hill. So, yeah, there could be something to that. But I do definitely feel they're pointing towards the rock. And the rock is kind of the rock is this kind of center of the island.
Oh, interesting.
You know, it's really, like, I've never measured it, but it's probably right around the middle. And it's there's no other boulders around there. It's just this big boulder and it's not covered by dirt. It's just sitting there on the ground, you know. And so it has this ring of cedars around it for some reason. It's just encircled by these cedars. So it has an almost kind of ritualistic, sort of magical kind of, you know, feeling to it.
Yeah.
You're telling us that, like, maybe it was like left by glaciers or something like that. Like, how big is it, Leo?
The rock, I couldn't wrap my arms around it. Like it's you know, it's like a boulder, you know, so it's like maybe 4 feet by 4 feet or something, 4 by 5 maybe.
Yeah. So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Is there any possibility that somebody moved it there at some point?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, really, we're the first people that have lived there. Mm-hmm. And before that, there was just a couple of people that stored their boats there and stuff. But
you know, that's more contemporarily. You know, you were talking about Indigenous
yeah
earlier on, and
oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I've always wanted to find something like that's evidence of, you know,
right.
Or, you know, but that is entirely possible. It's like a megalithic thing or something. But
yeah.
Well, actually, you know what's also cool is when you approach it from the tree path, as you follow those bent trees along and you approach it, it kind of looks like a head.
Oh.
Yeah, like, but not a human head, but more like the head that I saw.
Yeah.
So, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. That is interesting.
I think that's something I just noticed last summer, actually, but not in a way that it's carved or anything like that. Like it's just moss and creases in the rock and stuff.
Right.
It's natural, right?
Yeah.
But that still to me is like, even if it's natural. Again, it's this idea of works of art in nature, right? Like,
Yes.
Right.
Like the Badlands Guardian. You guys know about that?
No.
Oh, you got to look that up.
Okay.
It's this face in Alberta that was discovered through Google Maps. That is a natural formation. That is the head of. It's a profile of basically a Native American.
Oh wow! Look at that. That's beautiful too.
Yeah. They actually did an Ancient Aliens episode on it.
Oh, did they really?
Of course
They did. It's aliens.
Everything's aliens. Everything's aliens. And, as you're talking about the rock, like I just had that moment where I was reminded of some of the stuff Josh talked about in Ireland, where you get smaller stone circles and things like that, and some of them look fairly innocuous, and then you look closer and you realize, like, oh no, somebody put this here. It's not a natural occurrence. Something moved here.
That's right.
And so with all the directions and the sound and everything else, I was like, I wonder if...
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. And gosh, I wish I could, I keep looking like, oh, maybe I'll find a cave or something.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and sometimes though, if it was, and I want to be careful because I don't know the particulars of the indigenous people that were there, but when you've got your sacred spaces, you separate them from where you live typically. That's not always the case, but... So they may have put something there and gone back and forth. Yeah. I don't know. I'm really making a bunch of leaps there, but
totally. And I look through historical, but like I find stuff in antique shops, like old historical records of early settlers and stuff, and I'm looking for just interesting tidbits and stuff. And there definitely were indigenous people in the area with some settlements. Whether they were on our island, I'm sure they were at times. Whether they actually settled there at all, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But my friend who's a psychic, he thinks there's a strong sort of indigenous connection to what's going on, and I'm like, yeah, oh sure there is. I mean, it's nothing to do with whatever's happening. It's not to do with settler culture or whatever. It's something probably far older than than any humans. Whatever it is, and the same for everything, for Bigfoot, for all the stuff that's happening. It's something beyond all of us, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And speaking of Bigfoot, I guess like around this time, 2019 or so, was when I started to I had been interested in all kinds of interpretations in paranormal. I've been reading Carl Jung and Jacques Vallee, and I was really interested in the idea of connecting the different paranormal phenomena and realizing they had parallels with each other, like like you guys have talked about many times with. Between aliens and fairies and you name it. So this thing I was connecting most with lake monsters because it had appeared in the water. I was seeing it through the lens of Loch Ness and that type of thing. But then also you have these bent trees, and it's like, so what is this? Is it coming up onto land? Is it not just an aquatic creature? What is it? I don't know what it is. I just saw this head, and I'm piecing all these things together. And and then I came across, I don't remember how I found Tim Renner and Josh Cutchin's book, Where the Footsteps End, and read both of those. And I'm like, okay, so this unification of the paranormal thing goes further. I had never really thought about Bigfoot very much before. And I didn't know how universal it was, how so many people were seeing it, and how it was tied in with UFOs, and I'm like, oh my gosh, so maybe all these things are, they're all connected, and then I started to hear about bent trees, and I watched, Todd Standing, the Canadian guy. So he has this, movie where he claims to have captured these, Bigfoot on film, and it's really astonishing to look at. It was Discovering Bigfoot, I think it was the movie. But also in this movie, he's looking at these bent trees, and he's found the exact same bent trees that are on the island, and it's the same thing. And he's looking at them and going through the same thought process that I was going through in analyzing them. Is it snow load? No, it's not snow load. It's it's not wind. And he's like, his view is these Bigfoot that he's pursuing are leaving these things wherever they go. They're leaving them as signs. And that's when another thing started to click. I'm like, okay. And then I see Les Stroud, Survivor Man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's from up this way. And I think he has a place maybe not too far from me, I'm not sure, but and he found the same things. He's finding these bent trees, and who, like, these two guys know the woods.
Yeah.
And so they're not gonna they're not the type of guys to kind of be looking for things.
Right.
And Les Stroud had a whole series dedicated to what he was calling Bigfoot.
Yeah. And I appreciate Les too, because he's not afraid to talk about the experiences he had, because you can look up and hear him talking about mind speak. So this is not a person that's worried about his reputation being hurt by this.
Absolutely.
And also, it's not something you say if you're trying to like sensationalize Bigfoot as like, I found an ape in the woods.
Right.
Right. He's okay going and looking and talking about other things. And anyway. I don't want to get off topic, but I appreciate that.
No, it's not a topic. I mean, like, it's he's had mystical experiences with it, and he says, and people, somebody like, oh, you've gone off the deep end. That's great. Yeah, it's awesome that he's being honest.
Yeah,
and I've always loved his show, even when he first started out, because it's like he's bringing you along with him for an experience. Mm-hmm. And then you're experiencing something that you're learning through watching him, and then he's like, okay, well, when I'm doing this, I experience all these other things too, and I'm going to talk about it, and it's really great. I hope to meet him one day. I don't know, but I would invite him up and see if he wants to come and check it out.
Right.
But so the sound thing was really the second. It's like the first thing was a direct line of sight, and then the second thing was this sound, and boy, that sound, there was no explanation for that. And it would have been nice if I recorded it, but I almost don't care that much, because I heard it, she heard it, like, it was bizarre.
Right.
And then since then, it's been kind of a lot of tree stuff, like bigger chunks of tree appearing in weird places, like a whole 22-foot section off one of those trees that was hit by lightning. I came up one time, I'm walking up the hill, which leads to this area where everything happens. I'm walking up, and then I see this massive section of tree just lying there, and it's all stripped of bark because it's one of those dead trees. And I look at it, and there's a big hole next to it, and basically the whole top section of the tree it looks like it was ripped. Like, it's like the wood is kind of like in fibers, it's like ripped. Yeah. And then the thing is, it landed on its base. So it's like, you take the top 1/3 of a tree, and it goes over, and I measured it, it was 22 feet away from the base, and it landed on its base.
Well, that's weird.
Yeah, and then it's lying there, and it's so many things you have to factor in. See, I look at this and I think all these things, and then I show it to my family, and they're like, whatever, dude. And so, because it's done in such a way where you could easily ignore it, because it's just a piece of tree. But it lands right next to the path, and so it's not blocking the path. It's just that hole is right next to the path where it landed, and then the tree is sort of facing away from the path, and it's the base of it is right next to the path, and it's right where all these other things happen. And so you have this area where these things keep happening. And
if it just fell over, it would have fallen on its side, not on its base.
I went through, I mean, I actually saw other trees nearby where the top of the tree had come off and was lying next to the tree, or was like was pointed down and was caught up in another tree. And that's exactly right. It would topple over and fall head first. So this huge, heavy section of tree basically flying over, and so these things keep happening, that I keep seeing unusual things with branches and trees, but they're so natural, blending into the forest. And so I'm in this weird situation where, like, I share it with my siblings, my mother, and, I started to, a couple of years ago, I talked to my sister about it. Last year, I talked to my brother and my mother about it, started to actually say, listen, I think there's something here. And I've been aware of this and experiencing this for 20 years, and I want to tell you guys, because this is our place, we share it, and I'm sick of keeping it to myself, and always thinking something's about to happen, and no one's, like, what if something happens right now and everyone's standing here, like, okay. So, but what's interesting now is last summer, after I told my brother, and he immediately chopped up that section of tree with a chainsaw for firewood. And I'm like, actually, it is pretty damn good for firewood because it's really dry and it's just sitting there and it's the perfect size for firewood. You don't have to split it. So I'm like, maybe it was just giving us some firewood, I mean, it could have been a practical aspect to it. And because we were out of firewood when it came down, we had run out. And so last summer, I see my brother's wife down here in the city, and she's like, something weird happened at the cottage. And I'm like, oh, do tell.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, something was stomping around. So there's sort of the main cabin with the kitchen and everything, and then there's a sleeping cabin where the bedrooms are, and it has decking all around it. And and she's like, well, something was stomping around the cabin, and actually there had been a bear maybe the year before that my parents saw up near the cottage, a small bear, like a teenager bear or whatever, like a medium bear, and it just came out of the water. It was wet, and then it went away, and it went back in the water. Didn't bother anybody, and so of course everyone she's thinking, well, was it a bear? And so, but it was loud as hell, and it was stomping all around the cabin. Huh. Yeah, and it was woke her up at 1 a.m. or whatever. And then my brothers, I wasn't there. I was, they were up on their own, I guess. Maybe my mother was there, and so my brother, she wakes him up. She's like, go check it out. Find out what it is. And so he goes sort of to the back to the washroom where there's a window facing out to the back of the cabin where the noise roughly is coming from. And she's saying it's loud as hell, like it's, and he's looking out the window and he can't see anything. And he just hears the stomping over to the right of the window, and there's a door there, and he's like, I know if I open that door, I'm going to come in across whatever this large thing is. And he didn't open it.
Right. Yeah.
Would you? Right? Like, it's like, and so he listened to it for a while. He goes back to bed. He probably locked the doors. The kids are sleeping in another room there, and the thing keeps stomping around. And she says he goes to sleep. She doesn't go to sleep. And then she said it went for like 45 minutes. She's lying there, and it's bang, bang, bang. And then eventually, I guess it stopped, and she went back to sleep. I don't know how you go back to sleep with that, but I don't know. I'm like, I think it was paranormal. I don't think that was a bear.
Right.
I think if he opened that door, I don't think he would have seen anything.
Yeah.
I think it was something that was just making sound, like what I saw in the woods. It was sound when nothing was there. And I don't know if it was like sort of resulting from me talking to my brother about this, and then him kind of, he listened to me. He didn't make fun of me or anything, but he wasn't believing it. Maybe it was trying to say something to him to take it more seriously. I don't know.
Yeah.
But, it seems to me that it's, now that I've opened the topic up, I don't know, I think it might make itself more known. And wherever that leads, I don't see it as a dangerous thing. If I did, I wouldn't bring my kids up there.
Sure.
Right.
And that's a strange thing because my kids are there.
Right.
My siblings' kids are there, my nieces and nephews, and I do think this is real. And I just live with it every year, live this delicate balance of it could be. Sometimes I think, well, maybe I'm being absolutely foolish. Maybe it's just one of those things like in Poltergeist, like, get out, we should just get the hell out. Why don't you just leave, But I don't feel it's harmful. I think it announced itself to us in a non-harmful way, and I don't think it is harmful. And I think this name Strangelove has the word love in it and the word strange.
Yeah.
And I think,
just from what you've told us too, like, these have been they're very interesting experiences, right? But none of them it's not like anything was getting thrown at you or, something was banging on the side of the cabin, going along with the footsteps or anything that's.
Yeah, that's right.
There's no aggression towards you.
Yeah. That's right.
Because even when you have, and I've had this conversation, particularly with like AP Strange and some stuff like that, where, when people are experiencing like bad poltergeist activity, like people get scratches and things get thrown at them. And, so it's interesting because you've got a lot of letting you know that it's there, but it's not that doesn't seem to be aggression towards you.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I mean, when it made that sound, my friend thought it was screaming at us. That's what she heard, and I could sort of understand what she was saying because it was a bit shrieky. But I'm like, well, we don't know what that means. Maybe that's the way it sounds.
Right.
Yeah.
And, which is totally the right attitude to have too.
Yeah. But yeah, I maybe it's my disposition. Maybe I just always see the good in people and in paranormal creatures, and but yeah, it never has been threatening.
Yeah. Well, and with people's different experiences, like what they bring to it shapes it so much too, right?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
If you were to regard it as something negative, then it might respond to you that way.
And also when you think of that, I spoke to my brother about it and he kind of shrugged it off and then he cut up the tree and then later on this thing stomping, that's the most aggressive thing that's happened.
Right.
Stomping around the cabin. That's scary.
It is.
That's So, I mean, you don't know, is it going to open the door? What is it going to break through like the Kool-Aid guy or something?
Yeah.
So and then one time I was, after that I was up there on my own one time, and then I decided I'm not coming up on my own anymore because in the middle of the night I got too freaked out because I started to hear noises on the deck when I was falling asleep, and then I felt I was observing how I reacted, and my heart rate jumped. I started to sweat a bit. Because being there on your own, even though if another person was there, it wouldn't have meant I was any safer.
Right.
It's another person, right? And so I'm there, and I start hearing noises on the deck. I'm like, okay, this is what was happening. It happened a few times in the summer. We hearing noises I heard stuff on the roof, hearing noises around the cabin. And I'm like, it's coming, it's like it's coming closer. It didn't used to do anything in our space,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
maybe it was upsetting. He cut up the wood.
That's what I was thinking, right? I mean, like, or just kind of saying, listen, you need to, when telling you this stuff, maybe start to think about it a bit more and don't dismiss it.
Yeah.
And so it wants to make itself known. And then so I'm like, oh, it's like our own little, I memean, what's the word? I think in Josh's in Tim's book they call it a habituator.
Oh yeah.
Somebody who has something on their property. And that's what this is, and it's just interesting to see where it's going. I keep hoping, open up that portal, baby. If you got a portal or something, you're coming through.
Right.
Like I'm up for that. And we haven't even touched on other stuff. Like I've had dreams. There's a whole dream component to this whole thing. I can talk about that if you want. Or,
well, we're out of time for now, but maybe we'll have you back.
I'd love to. And, this summer I'll have more stuff to report.
All right. Okay.
Awesome.
We could do a live cast from the island.
Ooh.
But yeah, it's cool to see that it's something that is an ongoing situation. That I'm always curious, and I want to see what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And thank you for coming on and sharing this story.
Yeah, I'm really glad you had me on because it's really the first time I've shared it with anyone other than close friends. So I'm really happy and kind of relieved to have talked about it.
Yeah, it's definitely fascinating.
It is. It really is.
That's great.
All right. Thank you, Leo.
Thank you, guys.
I want to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons, and especially those of you pledging $10 or more. Greg Ross, Illuminati, Chuck Shutters, Leanne Cherry, Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Bart Ooms, 36 Dingo, CJ, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Christine, a blue second-gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, land of the crazy and communicable. Chris, Craig Cisternos, Greg Perlmenter, Diane B., Empty K, Eric Todd, J. Otto Bullitt, James Lattimore, James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linz Jackson K, Luke Osborne, MJ Armstrong, Mark Brady, Mr. Weird, Oli Andre Olar, Patricia W., Paul Jeffries, Philosopher of Mirrors, Ray Benedetto, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Russ Rouse, Sam Sharon, Seed Person 1, Stacy Sherwood, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Varosh K, Vincent Trewell, Walker, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Ren Collier, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, and Craig Sagastumi. Thank you all so very much for helping me keep this show going. So we decided to keep Leo around for a Patreon segment and get to some of the stuff he didn't get to during this conversation, some of the dream stuff, and we also get into talking about other things as we go on for a very lengthy Patreon segment following this. If you're a Patreon, you'll be getting that soon. If you want to become a Patreon, it's only $3 a month, and you get extra stuff all month long, and you help support the show and keep this going. And you can do all that at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com, where you can also listen to shows all the way back to the very first one over 10 years ago. And I will see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.